What's the biggest wedding disaster you've ever seen? My wedding cake collapsed and fell onto the floor while the baker was carrying it into the reception hall, and that was probably the best thing that happened all day. You see, my wedding started with the florist delivering funeral wreaths instead of centerpieces. Then the string quartet had shown up drunk at the rehearsal. The priest somehow broke his leg, and the venue's power went out twice during setup. Now the cake was destroyed 12 hours before my wedding. My phone rang, and it was my maid of honor, Sophia. "Don't panic," she said. "What happened now?" I asked. "Your dress," she said. "The dry cleaner had a fire. Not a big fire, but your dress was right where the smoke damage hit worst. It's completely black." I sat down on the floor next to the cake disaster. The wedding coordinator stepped over me to deal with the mess while I tried to breathe. My backup dress was at my apartment, but that felt like admitting defeat. "I'll figure something out," Sophia said. "We have time." Jackson called while she was talking. I switched over expecting more bad news, but he sounded weirdly calm. "Hey, beautiful," he said. "How's everything going over there?" "The cake is destroyed and my dress is ruined," I said. "What? Are you serious?" he said. "How's your side going?" I asked. "Fine," he said too quickly. "Totally fine. So totally fine. Nothing wrong here." "Jackson, what happened?" I asked. He sighed. "My uncle got food poisoning at the rehearsal dinner restaurant. Half the groomsmen are sick, but they'll rally by tomorrow," he said. After we hung up, I went outside where the reception tent was half collapsed. The rental company said a truck had backed into the main support pole. They were fixing it, but it looked wrong, like everything else about this wedding. That night at the hotel, I made a list of everything that had gone wrong. It was 15 items long. Sophia sat with me going through each disaster. "Maybe we should postpone," she said. "We can't," I said. "People flew in from everywhere. Jackson's whole family is here from Puerto Rico." "But this is crazy," she said. "What if tomorrow is worse?" We went ahead with it either day. The wedding morning started with the photographer calling to say their car had been stolen with all their equipment. Then the makeup artist got stuck in an elevator. The replacement flowers were the wrong color. The musicians who were substituting for the string quartet couldn't find the venue. I was sitting in my hotel room in my backup dress when Jackson called. "We have a problem," he said. "What now?" I asked. "The marriage license," he said. "It's gone. I had it in my room safe and now it's just gone." "That's impossible," I said. "Hotel safes don't just open." "I know," he said, "but it's not here." Without the license, we couldn't legally get married. The courthouse was closed on Saturdays. We'd have to postpone after all, which meant admitting that whatever was happening had won. "Wait," Jackson said. "My cousin Miguel is ordained. He could do a ceremony today and we'll do the legal stuff later." "Is that legal?" I asked. "The ceremony would be real to everyone there," he said. "We'll figure out paperwork next week." I heard shouting in the background on his end. "What's happening?" I asked. "The limo driver just said all 4 tires are flat," he said. "On all 3 limos." "Jackson, this isn't normal," I said. "Someone is doing this." "Who would go this far to stop our wedding?" he asked. During the ceremony, things got stranger. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes and the backup tent started shaking. The photographer's assistant fainted. 3 separate phones went off with emergency alerts for a tornado warning even though the sky was clear. Then the birds started hitting the tent. Just regular sparrows, but dozens of them flying straight into the canvas walls over and over. The guests were screaming and covering their heads. Jackson pulled me behind him as more birds kept coming from nowhere, slamming into the tent like they couldn't see it. My grandmother, a self-proclaimed shaman with a touch of dementia, stood up in the chaos and pointed at the entrance. "She's here," she said. "I can see her." Everyone turned to look, but no one was there. Just an empty doorway with birds diving past it. But my grandmother kept pointing with her hand shaking. "She's wearing white," my grandmother said. "She's so angry." The tent pole cracked then, and the whole structure started coming down. People ran in every direction as canvas and metal collapsed around us. Jackson grabbed my hand and we ran toward the parking lot. When we reached the cars, I turned back to make sure everyone got out. Standing in the field behind where the tent had been was a woman in a full wedding dress. Her dress was pristine white and old-fashioned with a cathedral veil covering her face. She was maybe 50 feet away, just standing completely still in the middle of the empty field watching us. She lifted one hand and waved at us slowly. "Who are you?" I screamed, but then I realized Jackson was frozen and crying. Jackson finally turned to face me and his cheeks were wet with tears that kept coming. I followed his gaze back across the empty field where the woman in white still stood completely motionless, like a statue waiting for something. My hand started shaking so hard I could barely grab his arm, but I did, and squeezed tight. "Who is she?" I said through my teeth. "Jackson? Who the hell is that?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first, and I shook his arm harder. "Tell me right now." His voice came out broken and quiet when he finally spoke. "Caitlin," he whispered. The name hit me like cold water, and suddenly every single disaster made perfect sense. His ex-girlfriend, who he swore had moved on 6 months ago and was dating someone new. The woman in the field took one slow step forward and my stomach dropped. So fast I thought I might throw up right there in the parking lot. This wasn't bad luck or coincidence or some cosmic joke. Someone had deliberately destroyed our wedding piece by piece, and she was standing right there watching us deal with the aftermath. The florist delivering funeral wreaths, the drunk musicians, the stolen photographer equipment, the missing marriage license, the flat tires on every single limo. All of it was her. Sophia appeared at my side, breathing hard from running, and she looked where I was looking. "Is that who I think it is?" she asked. I couldn't answer because my throat was too tight, but Sophia immediately pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. The woman didn't move or react to the camera flashes. She just stood there in that old-fashioned white dress with the long veil covering her face. Jackson made a choking sound, and I realized he was completely useless right now. "We're leaving," I said loud enough for the people standing around us to hear. "Everyone get in whatever cars still work and go back to the hotel." My grandmother came over with Jackson's mother supporting her arm. "She's still there," my grandmother said, pointing at the field. "I can see her clear as day." Jackson's mother looked confused because she couldn't see anything but empty grass. I started herding people toward the cars that hadn't been damaged. Miguel helped get his parents into a sedan, while Sophia stayed next to me taking more photos, until Caitlin finally turned and walked away into the trees behind the field. She moved slowly like she had all the time in the world, and I watched until the white dress disappeared completely. The drive back to the hotel took 15 minutes and nobody spoke in our car. Jackson sat in the passenger seat staring at his hands while Sophia drove, and I sat in back trying to breathe normally. My brain kept replaying every disaster and seeing Caitlin's face behind each one. At the hotel, I gathered everyone in our room, which suddenly felt way too small. Sophia, Miguel, and Jackson's parents all squeezed in, while Jackson sat on the bed with his head in his hands, like he couldn't hold it up anymore. I stood in the middle of the room and laid out everything that had gone wrong, starting with the funeral wreaths 2 days ago. The broken priest leg, the power outages, the destroyed cake, my ruined dress, the stolen photography equipment, the missing license, the flat tires, the birds attacking the tent. 15 disasters in 3 days. Jackson's father looked sick. His mother kept shaking her head. Miguel pulled out his phone and started taking notes. "Jackson," I said, and my voice came out harder than I meant it to. "What was your relationship with Caitlin really?" He looked up and fresh tears started. "We dated for 2 years," he said quietly. "We broke up 8 months ago, but I kept responding when she texted me." My chest got tight. "What does that mean?" I asked. "I met her for coffee twice after we got engaged," he said, and wouldn't look at me. "Nothing physical happened, I swear, but I should have cut contact completely, and I didn't." His mother made a small sound. "Jackson, we talked about this," she said. "I told you to stop answering her messages." "I know," he said. "I thought I was being nice, but I see now that I was just giving her false hope." The anger that hit me was so strong I had to clench my fists to keep from screaming, but I pushed it down because right now I needed information more than I needed to yell at him. "Can she do this?" I asked. "Is she capable of planning all these disasters?" Sophia was already on her phone pulling up social media. "Found her," Sophia said, and turned the screen toward me. Caitlin's profile showed a pretty woman with dark hair and a bright smile. Her job title made my blood run cold. "She works in event planning," Sophia said, reading from the screen. "She coordinates weddings and corporate events for a company downtown." Of course she did. She would know exactly how to sabotage vendors and timing and all the little details that make events work. She would have contacts and knowledge and access to everything we needed for our wedding. Miguel stood up. "We need to call the police right now," he said. "This is criminal." "And tell them what?" I asked. "My fiancé's ex showed up in a wedding dress? That sounds crazy without actual proof." Sophia nodded. "She's right. We need evidence first or they won't take us seriously." She sat down at the desk and opened her laptop. "I'm making a list of every disaster with exact times and what happened." I tried to breathe through the anger building in my chest every time I looked at Jackson. He sat there looking miserable and guilty, and I wanted to shake him. "You're sleeping in Miguel's room tonight," I told Jackson. "I can't look at you right now." He nodded without arguing and stood up slowly. Miguel put a hand on his shoulder and they left together. Jackson's parents followed after his mother gave me a tight hug. Once the door closed, Sophia and I sat in silence for a minute. Then we started going through everything looking for patterns. My phone rang around midnight and it was Paula, the wedding coordinator. "I just heard what happened with the tent," she said. "Is everyone okay?" I explained our theory about deliberate sabotage and Caitlin. Paula went quiet for a long moment. "That would explain something weird," she finally said. "Several vendor changes came through email in the last week. Different flower arrangements, musician substitutions, venue access times. It seemed odd, but I assumed you were stressed and kept changing your mind." My heart started pounding. "Can you forward me all those emails?" I asked. "Of course," Paula said. "Give me 10 minutes." Sophia and I waited, staring at her laptop screen until the emails started coming through. There were 7 of them spread across 5 days. Sophia opened each one, carefully reading the sender addresses. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the screen. The emails came from an address that looked almost exactly like mine but had one letter different. Instead of my name, it used a slightly misspelled version that would be easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. "That's it," I said, and felt something like victory mixed with rage. "That's our proof. Someone was impersonating me to sabotage the vendors." Sophia screenshot every email and started a document organizing all our evidence. We finally had something concrete that showed this wasn't just bad luck or coincidence. Someone had systematically destroyed our wedding, and we could prove it. That night, I stared at the hotel ceiling while Sophia slept in the other bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jackson's guilty face, or that woman in white standing in the field. My anger at him kept mixing with my need to prove what happened. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and pulled out my phone to make notes about what we needed to do. By the time sunlight came through the curtains, I had a plan written out in my notes app. Sophia woke up around 7 and found me already dressed and pacing. She brought coffee from the lobby and her laptop without me even asking. We headed down to the hotel security office and asked to speak to someone about our missing marriage license. The front desk called back to security, and a guy named Dorian came out to meet us in a small office near the loading dock. He was maybe 40 with graying hair, and he actually listened when I explained the whole pattern of disasters. I showed him the emails Paula had forwarded and the list of everything that went wrong. Dorian nodded slowly and said he could pull the door logs for our floor to see who accessed our hallway. He typed on his computer for a few minutes while Sophia and I waited. The room smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. Dorian finally turned his screen toward us and pointed at a line of code. Someone had used a master override on our room safe at 3 in the morning the night before the wedding. He explained that only managers had that access, or someone who bribed a staff member to use their credentials. He promised to review the hallway camera footage and get back to us within a few hours. We thanked him and headed out to the parking lot where my car was still parked from yesterday's chaos. Next, we drove to the limo company across town. The manager was a woman in her 50s who seemed annoyed until I explained our sabotage theory. She walked out to their garage with us and actually got down on her knees to inspect the tires on all 3 limos that were supposed to transport our wedding party. After checking each one carefully, she stood up and brushed off her pants. She confirmed that all 12 tires were deflated using the valve stems, which takes time and knowledge. This wasn't random vandalism by kids. Someone deliberately tampered with every single tire in the early morning hours when nobody was around. She pulled up their security logs and showed us that someone had cut their camera feed from 2 to 4 in the morning. We got copies of everything and added it to our evidence folder. Back in the car, Sophia called our friend Ruben, who works in IT, and asked if he could help trace the spoofed emails. He said to come over right away. Ruben lived in an apartment downtown with 3 computers set up in his living room. He made us sit on his couch while he pulled up our wedding website on one screen and the email headers on another. Within an hour, he found that someone had reset the admin password 3 days before the wedding using a recovery email we didn't recognize. The recovery email was a burner account that looked like random letters and numbers. Ruben kept typing and clicking through different screens while explaining what he was finding. He traced the spoofed email domain to a burner account created exactly 2 weeks before our wedding date. The wedding website changes were made from an IP address at a co-working space downtown on 5th Street. He wrote down the address for us and said this was real evidence that proved someone planned this systematically. I felt my confidence growing as each piece of evidence connected to the next. I knew I needed to talk to Jackson even though I was still furious at him. He was staying in his cousin's room, so I called and told him to meet me in the hotel restaurant. When he showed up, he looked like he hadn't slept either. I asked him directly where Caitlin lived and where she worked. He gave me her workplace address at an event planning company and her apartment building location. Then he admitted that during one of their coffee meetings, she told him she would do anything to get him back. He said it in this quiet, ashamed voice that made me want to scream. I asked why he didn't tell me that before, and he just shook his head. I left him sitting there and went back upstairs to find Sophia. My phone rang while I was in the elevator, and it was the string quartet. The violinist said they needed to tell me something important. All 4 of them got violently ill within an hour at our rehearsal, and they thought their drinks were spiked. She explained that they only had 2 drinks each, and they saved the receipts to prove it. Normal drunkenness doesn't hit 4 people at exactly the same time like that. They wanted to know if we were pursuing legal action because they felt violated by what happened. I told them yes and asked them to send me copies of everything they had. 20 minutes later, the restaurant where we held the rehearsal dinner called. The manager said they were investigating the groomsmen's food poisoning because only that specific table got sick. Everyone else at the rehearsal ate the same menu items with no problems. The kitchen manager saved a food sample and sent it to a lab because he suspected someone added something to those specific meals. It wasn't a foodborne illness from their kitchen. He promised to send us the lab results as soon as they came back. Dorian called back around 2 in the afternoon. He found security footage showing a woman in a dark coat carrying a garment bag who used a staff corridor near our room around 2:45 in the morning. The footage was grainy and black and white, but he could make out her general height and build. He sent the video file to my email and said the woman matched the description I gave him of Caitlin. She had walked right past the camera like she knew exactly where she was going. The garment bag was large enough to hold a wedding dress. Sophia and I watched the video 3 times on her laptop trying to see any identifying details. You couldn't see her face clearly, but her build and the way she moved looked exactly like the woman we saw in the field. We now had evidence of someone accessing our floor at the exact time the safe was opened. I made a new document and started organizing everything by category. Physical sabotage like the tires and tent, digital sabotage like the emails and website, personal items like the dress fire and missing license, food and drink tampering at the rehearsal events. Each category had multiple pieces of evidence with timestamps and witness statements. The pattern was undeniable. Someone spent weeks planning and executing a systematic destruction of our wedding. That someone had access to vendor information, event planning knowledge, and enough determination to risk criminal charges. Everything pointed to Caitlin. Paula called back the next morning with news about the florist orders. She pulled up all the email exchanges and found the one requesting funeral wreaths instead of centerpieces. The message came from that spoofed address that looked almost identical to mine. Paula read it out loud, and the florist had replied, asking if we had a death in the family, because the wreath order seemed unusual for a wedding. The fake me wrote back saying it was a special cultural tradition, and to please just deliver them as requested. Paula forwarded everything to my email, so we had another piece of documented proof. Ruben called right after Paula hung up. He spent all night digging into the spoofed domain registration and traced it back to 3 prepaid gift cards purchased at different stores. The cards were bought at locations within 2 miles of Caitlin's apartment. He cross-referenced the wedding website admin password reset with Caitlin's social media check-ins and found she posted photos from a coffee shop right next to that co-working space on the exact day someone changed our website settings. Every single thread of evidence was pointing straight at her. Ruben and I drove to the co-working space that afternoon to ask questions. The front desk guy remembered a woman matching Caitlin's description, who bought a day pass about 2 weeks before our wedding. He said she seemed nervous and kept looking around like she didn't want anyone to notice her. The detail that made my skin crawl was when he mentioned she carried a white box that looked like it held a veil or other wedding accessories. I showed him a photo of Caitlin from her social media, and he confirmed that was definitely the woman he saw. We got his contact information for the police report and headed back to meet with a pest control consultant Ruben had found. The consultant explained that portable sonic devices combined with strategically placed birdseed can completely disorient birds and make them fly into structures. It's actually a misused bird deterrent system that someone with basic research could figure out how to weaponize. He said the devices are small enough to hide in bushes and can be activated remotely with a phone app. Everything that seemed supernatural suddenly had a rational explanation. Ruben and I drove straight to the collapsed tent site to search for evidence. We walked the entire perimeter looking in bushes and under debris for about 40 minutes. I was about to give up when Ruben called me over to a thick bush about 30 feet from where the tent had stood. Hidden in the branches was a small black plastic casing about the size of a deck of cards. Scattered around it were seeds that didn't match anything else growing in that area. I used a plastic bag from my car to collect both the device casing and some of the seed residue. Finding physical proof felt amazing after days of just collecting digital evidence and witness statements. My grandmother called while we were driving back and started talking about the woman in white she saw at the ceremony. She mentioned something I hadn't noticed during all the chaos. The woman smelled strongly of smoke when she walked past. That detail hit me hard because it made me think about the dry cleaner fire that destroyed my dress. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I called the dry cleaner as soon as I got home and asked if they could check their security footage from the day of the fire. The owner was reluctant at first, but agreed when I explained we were building a criminal case. He called back 2 hours later and said he found something concerning on the footage. The dry cleaner sent me grainy security stills showing a hooded figure near the intake bins, about an hour before the small fire started in that exact area. You couldn't see the person's face clearly, but their build and height matched Caitlin perfectly. The timing was way too convenient to be coincidence. Dorian called that evening with an update from his investigation. He finally tracked down the housekeeper who had opened the staff corridor near our room. She admitted that a woman approached her 2 nights before the wedding and offered $200 cash to prop open the back door for just 5 minutes. The housekeeper said the woman claimed it was for a surprise for her friend staying at the hotel. Dorian asked her to describe the woman, and everything matched Caitlin, including a distinctive silver bracelet with charms that the housekeeper remembered clearly. Sophia came over that night to help me organize all the new evidence. While we were sorting through photos, she suddenly sat up straight and grabbed my arm. She remembered meeting Caitlin 6 months ago at a coffee shop when Jackson introduced them awkwardly. Sophia pulled up her phone and scrolled through old photos until she found one from that day. She had taken a picture of her latte, and Jackson was visible in the background talking to a woman. That woman was definitely the same person we saw standing in the field wearing the wedding dress. Seeing photographic proof that Jackson knew her and introduced her to Sophia months ago made everything feel more real and more awful. Ruben sent me a text around midnight with his final findings about the prepaid gift cards. He traced the purchases back to 3 different stores, all within 2 miles of Caitlin's workplace. One store still had security footage from the purchase date. The footage showed a woman in sunglasses and a baseball cap buying multiple prepaid cards at the customer service counter. Her height and build matched Caitlin, and she paid with cash like she was trying to avoid leaving a paper trail. We now had her connected to the spoofed emails, the co-working space, the bird device, the dry cleaner fire, the hotel break-in, and the gift card purchases used to register the fake domain. I found Jackson in his hotel room and didn't bother knocking before I walked in. He looked up from his phone, and I could see the guilt all over his face before I even said anything. I asked him straight out if he ever told Caitlin any details about our wedding plans. He hesitated for way too long, and that hesitation made my hands start shaking. He finally admitted that he mentioned the venue name and the date during one of their coffee meetings because she asked, and he didn't think it mattered at the time. I stared at him, trying to process how he could be that stupid. She asked about our wedding, and he just told her everything she needed to sabotage us. I told him I couldn't be in the same room with him right now and left before I said something I couldn't take back. I went straight to Paula's temporary office at the hotel where she was still working through vendor issues. She took one look at my face and asked what happened. I told her about Jackson's admission, and she shook her head but didn't seem surprised. We spent the next 3 hours going through every single disaster with costs attached. The florist charged us for funeral wreaths we never ordered. The string quartet wanted payment even though they showed up drunk. The photographer's stolen equipment wasn't covered by their insurance, so they wanted us to cover it. The tent rental company was billing us for the damage from the truck. The dry cleaner wanted payment for the fire damage even though it destroyed my dress. Paula pulled out her calculator and started adding everything up while I watched the numbers climb. She got to $30,000 and we weren't even done yet. That didn't include the emotional damage or the fact that we never actually got married. Paula said we needed to file insurance claims for everything and possibly pursue legal action against Caitlin for the financial damages. She printed out copies of every invoice and receipt and organized them into a folder that looked like evidence for a trial. Back in my room, Sophia was waiting with Jackson's parents who had flown in from Puerto Rico. They wanted to know what our next move was. I laid out everything we had on Caitlin and said we could either confront her directly or go straight to the police. Sophia immediately said police because confronting someone this unstable could be dangerous. I admitted I wanted answers about why she did this and what she thought would happen. Jackson's father said we should absolutely involve the police because if Caitlin went this far already, she might escalate further. His mother agreed and said they needed to protect us from whatever Caitlin might do next. I knew they were right, but part of me still wanted to look her in the eye and ask her why. Jackson showed up at the door and asked if he could come in. I almost said no, but his parents nodded, so I let him. I told him I needed complete honesty about what he said to Caitlin during those coffee meetings. He sat down on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. He said he complained about wedding stress and how overwhelming all the planning was. He admitted that Caitlin listened and comforted him and made him feel understood. He said she probably took that as a sign that he was having doubts about marrying me. Hearing him say it out loud made me so angry I couldn't sit still. I asked him if he realized he was basically telling his ex that he wasn't happy. He said he knew it was wrong, but he didn't think she would do something like this. Our argument got louder and Jackson's parents quietly left the room. I asked him directly if part of him wanted her to stop the wedding. He swore he didn't, but the way he said it made me doubt him. His guilt was written all over his face, and I couldn't tell if he felt guilty about the coffee meetings or guilty about secretly wanting an out. I told him I needed space to decide if I even wanted to marry someone who couldn't set boundaries with his ex. He started to argue, but I held up my hand and told him to leave. After he left, I sat on the bed, trying not to cry, but failing completely. I heard a knock and assumed it was Sophia, but when I opened the door, Jackson's mother was standing there. She came in and sat next to me while I cried. She said she warned Jackson months ago to cut all contact with Caitlin completely. She told him that staying in touch with an ex while planning a wedding was disrespectful to me and dangerous for their relationship. She apologized for not pushing harder and said she would support whatever decision I made about the relationship. That made me cry harder because I didn't even know what decision I wanted to make. The next morning, Paula called with news from Caitlin's workplace. She had contacted their HR department pretending to verify employment for a vendor contract. HR confirmed that Caitlin took sudden emergency leave starting 3 days before our wedding. Paula also talked to a coworker who mentioned that Caitlin had been driving a blue hatchback that matched a car multiple people saw near our venue in the days leading up to the wedding. We were so close to having everything we needed for a solid case. I gathered all our evidence and went to the police station with Dorian, who brought the hotel security footage and access logs. The detective assigned to our case was a woman in her 40s who listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she said the pattern showed clear premeditation and multiple criminal acts. She took copies of everything and said they would open a formal investigation. Dorian provided his contact information and offered to help with any additional hotel records they needed. Walking out of the police station, I felt like we were finally taking control of the situation instead of just reacting to disasters. That feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it and my hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The photo showed the inside of my current hotel room. My backup dress was hanging in the closet exactly where I left it that morning. Someone had been inside my room and taken this photo. Caitlin somehow still had access and was sending me a message that she wasn't done. I called hotel security immediately, and Dorian came up to check my room. Nothing was missing or disturbed, but knowing she had been in there made my skin crawl. I forwarded the text to Ruben, who called back within 20 minutes. He said the text came from a VoIP service that masked the real number. He was working on tracing it, but the geofence data suggested it originated from somewhere near the co-working space where Caitlin made the website changes. I called the detective back and told her about the text. She said this added stalking and harassment to the potential charges and asked me to forward her the photo and number. She also suggested I change hotels immediately for my safety. I packed everything in under 20 minutes and checked into a different hotel across town using just my middle name. The new room felt safer, but I couldn't shake the image of someone standing in my old room taking that photo. Paula called while I was unpacking and her voice sounded tight with stress. She'd been checking vendor pages and found 3 negative reviews posted in the last hour, claiming we were impossible clients who refused to pay deposits and made unreasonable demands. The reviews were detailed enough to sound real, but Paula knew they were complete lies because she handled all vendor communications. We spent an hour documenting each fake review with screenshots and timestamps, while Paula contacted the vendors directly to explain the situation. Most of them believed us and agreed to flag the reviews as fraudulent, but the damage to our reputation was already spreading through wedding planning forums. Paula forwarded everything to the detective as more evidence of ongoing harassment and reputation destruction. Jackson's family gathered at his parents' hotel suite that evening to discuss what we should do next. His father wanted us to pack up and fly home to Puerto Rico immediately, arguing that no wedding was worth this level of danger and stress. His mother agreed and said we could have a small ceremony there once everything calmed down. But Jackson's grandmother stood up and said running away wouldn't stop someone this determined and obsessed. She looked directly at me and said we needed to face this properly with the authorities, instead of letting fear make our decisions. The room went quiet, and I felt everyone's eyes on me waiting for my response. I told them I understood their concern, but I agreed with grandmother that leaving now would just postpone the problem instead of solving it. My own grandmother called me later that night and asked to meet privately in the hotel lobby. She looked tired and worried when I sat down next to her on the lobby couch. She said she couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the field and what she saw in that moment. My grandmother explained that what she witnessed wasn't just heartbreak or sadness, but real malice and rage directed at both of us. She took my hand and told me I needed to choose safety and honesty over trying to salvage a wedding spectacle that was already destroyed. She also said Jackson needed to fully understand the seriousness of what his actions enabled by not cutting contact with his ex completely. I promised her I would prioritize safety and that Jackson and I were already in therapy to work through the trust issues. The detective called the next morning with lab results from the groomsman's food sample that the restaurant had saved. The lab confirmed the food contained dangerous amounts of over-the-counter laxatives mixed into the sauce, traced back to a purchase made at a pharmacy 2 blocks from our venue. The purchase was made using a loyalty card registered to an email address that connected directly to an account at Caitlin's workplace. I felt my chest tighten as another piece of evidence clicked into place, proving this was all deliberate and planned. The detective also said the bird deterrent device casing we found had a partial fingerprint that was processed through their system. The device brand traced to a specific hardware chain with locations throughout the city, and police were visiting stores looking for purchase records that might connect to Caitlin. I spent the day trying to distract myself but jumping every time my phone rang with updates. 2 days later, the detective called with news that made my hands shake. A hardware store 3 miles from our venue produced a receipt for the exact sonic device model we found, purchased 4 days before our wedding. The receipt showed payment with a corporate credit card, whose last 4 digits matched a card Caitlin used for work travel, according to her employer's records. The store's security footage showed a woman in sunglasses buying the device, and the build and clothing matched Caitlin's appearance in other footage we'd collected. I sat on the hotel bed staring at my phone as the detective explained that the evidence was strong enough to make an arrest, but getting a confession would make the case even stronger. She suggested we could set up a controlled meeting with Caitlin where I would wear a wire while plainclothes officers watched from nearby. My stomach dropped at the thought of sitting across from Caitlin and confronting her directly about everything she'd done. I told the detective I needed to think about it and talk to Jackson and Sophia first. Sophia came over immediately when I called and listened while I explained the wire plan. She said it was my choice, but she understood if I was too scared to do it. Jackson arrived 20 minutes later and said he would support whatever I decided, but he thought getting a confession might give us closure and ensure Caitlin faced real consequences. I thought about my grandmother's words about choosing safety and facing this directly instead of running away. After an hour of discussion, I told them I was brave enough to do it if police were nearby and could step in if things got dangerous. The detective walked me through the plan and gave me the VoIP number Caitlin had used to send the stalking text. I typed out a message saying I knew what she did and asking to meet and talk. My finger hovered over the send button for a full minute before I pressed it. Caitlin responded within 3 minutes, agreeing to meet at a busy cafe downtown the next afternoon, and my stomach started churning with anxiety that didn't stop for the next 20 hours. The cafe was crowded with the lunch rush when Jackson and I arrived early to meet the plainclothes officers. The detective showed me the small recording device clipped under my shirt collar and reminded me to keep Caitlin talking about specific incidents. 2 officers took tables near us pretending to work on laptops while another sat at the counter. Jackson sat across from me and squeezed my hand under the table as we waited. Caitlin walked in exactly on time, wearing dark jeans and a black sweater with the same silver bracelet the housekeeper had described dangling from her wrist. She looked completely calm and composed as she sat down in the empty chair and smiled at both of us. She asked if we were finally ready to admit the wedding was a mistake, and that she'd done us a favor by stopping it. My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to ask what she meant by stopping it. Caitlin leaned back in her chair and launched into a speech about how Jackson never really loved me and only proposed because he felt pressured by his family. She said she was saving him from making a terrible mistake by marrying someone who didn't understand him the way she did. Her voice was steady and confident as she listed every disaster she'd caused, framing each one as protective rather than destructive. She talked about changing the florist order to funeral wreaths because our relationship was dead, spiking the musicians' drinks because our ceremony deserved to fail, poisoning the groomsmen because Jackson's friends never supported their real connection. She described breaking into our hotel room to steal the marriage license like it was a noble rescue mission. The complete lack of remorse in her voice made my skin crawl as she kept talking about how much she loved Jackson and how everything she did was motivated by wanting to protect him from me. Jackson's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back from the table and stood up. His hands were shaking, but his voice came out steady when he looked directly at Caitlin and told her he loved me, that he was sorry for leading her on by not cutting contact completely, but what she did was criminal and completely wrong. He said there was no excuse for poisoning people, destroying property, and trying to ruin our lives. Caitlin's confident expression cracked for the first time since she sat down. Her mouth opened slightly and she stared at Jackson like she genuinely expected him to thank her instead of condemn her. She reached across the table toward his hand, but he pulled away and sat back down next to me. The shock on her face shifted into something harder as she realized we weren't here to admit she was right, or to break up because of her intervention. I told her we had evidence of everything she did and we were pressing charges. Her chair squeaked as she stood up fast and grabbed her tote bag from the floor. She said she needed to leave and started backing toward the cafe entrance. The two plainclothes officers at nearby tables stood up at the same time and moved to block her path. One of them showed his badge and told her to sit back down. The detective from the counter approached our table and explained they had enough evidence to detain her for questioning, based on the recorded confession and physical evidence collected. Caitlin didn't fight or run, but she refused to sit back down. She stood there with her arms crossed, insisting she did the right thing, and that we would thank her someday when Jackson realized he was making a mistake. The detective asked her to come to the station voluntarily, or they could arrest her right there. She chose to go voluntarily, but kept talking about how Jackson deserved better and how she was protecting him from a bad marriage. At the police station, they took Caitlin to an interview room while Jackson and I waited in a different area with the detective. After about 40 minutes, another officer came out carrying a clear evidence bag with our marriage license inside. The detective explained they found it in Caitlin's tote bag, along with a hotel master key card that she obtained by bribing a hotel employee with $200. The hotel had already fired the employee after reviewing security footage, and the employee was now cooperating with the investigation to avoid charges. They also found receipts for the Sonic Bird device, prepaid gift cards used to register the spoofed email domain, and a notebook with detailed plans for each disaster written in Caitlin's handwriting. The evidence was overwhelming, and they said the district attorney would likely file multiple felony charges within the next few days. Paula met us at a coffee shop the next morning to help sort through the insurance mess. She had contacted every vendor and explained the situation, providing police report numbers and evidence documentation. Most vendors were understanding once they knew we were victims of deliberate sabotage rather than difficult clients. Paula walked us through filing claims for the damaged cake, ruined dress, stolen photography equipment, and the tent collapse. The insurance company would need time to process everything, but Paula thought we could recover about 60% of our losses. The detective called while we were reviewing paperwork to let us know we could also pursue civil restitution once the criminal case was resolved. That meant Caitlin might be ordered to pay back some of our financial damages as part of her sentence, though Paula warned that collecting on civil judgments could take years and wasn't guaranteed. That evening, we gathered both families in a conference room at the hotel. Jackson's parents flew back from Puerto Rico thinking the wedding chaos was over, so seeing them walk in looking confused and worried made my stomach hurt. I started from the beginning, explaining how we realized someone was sabotaging us, and walked through the investigation step by step. Sophia helped by showing the evidence photos on her laptop while I talked. Jackson's father got redder and angrier as the story went on, finally interrupting to demand why Jackson hadn't cut off contact with his ex completely after getting engaged. Jackson admitted he made a terrible mistake by meeting Caitlin for coffee and responding to her texts because he thought he was being nice by staying friendly. His father said that wasn't nice, it was stupid and disrespectful to me. The room got tense and quiet until Jackson's mother put her hand on her husband's arm and said they needed to focus on supporting us moving forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes. My parents agreed, and my father said what mattered now was that the person responsible was caught and we were safe. Everyone spent another hour asking questions about the evidence and the charges before finally accepting that the crisis was actually over. Miguel pulled Jackson and me aside as families were leaving and said he wanted to offer something. He explained that he was ordained and could perform a small symbolic vow exchange with just immediate family present, and we could file the legal marriage paperwork later once we had a new license. The idea surprised me, but as he described it, something about a tiny, intimate ceremony felt more right than trying to recreate the big wedding we'd planned. I told Miguel I needed to think about it because I wasn't sure I was ready to get married at all after everything that happened. Jackson looked hurt, but nodded and said he understood. Over the next few days, I threw myself into practical tasks that made me feel more in control. Jackson and I changed every password on every account, going through banking, email, social media, and vendor portals one by one. I filed for a restraining order against Caitlin with help from a victim advocate at the police station. The paperwork took hours, but knowing she legally couldn't contact us made me breathe easier. Paula became our single point of contact for all remaining vendor communications, which meant Caitlin couldn't impersonate me anymore even if she tried. We installed new locks on both our apartments, and I set up security cameras that sent alerts to my phone. Taking these concrete steps to protect ourselves helped me feel less like a helpless victim, and more like someone who could fight back. I asked Jackson to sit down with me one evening and told him directly that I needed us to go to couples therapy before I was ready to actually get married. I explained that his failure to set boundaries with Caitlin enabled everything that happened, and I needed to trust him again before I could commit to marriage. He agreed immediately without arguing or making excuses. He pulled out his phone right there and started searching for therapists who specialized in relationship boundaries and trust issues. Within 20 minutes, he had booked our first session for the following week and showed me the confirmation email. The speed of his response surprised me, but also helped me believe he understood how serious this was. The detective called with an update about the charges. The district attorney was filing 4 felony counts against Caitlin, including vandalism, criminal trespass, fraud, and arson related to the dry cleaning fire. She was also being evaluated for a mental health diversion program that might reduce her sentence if she completed treatment. Either way, she would have a no-contact order that lasted at least 5 years, meaning she couldn't legally contact either of us or come within 500 feet of our homes or workplaces. Violating the order would result in immediate arrest. The detective explained that the evaluation would determine if Caitlin qualified for mental health treatment instead of prison time, but she would still have a criminal record and conditions she had to follow. Ruben showed up at my apartment with his laptop and said he finally figured out the tornado alert mystery that had been bothering him. He pulled up the wedding website admin panel and showed me that Caitlin had hijacked it after resetting the password. She used the website's notification system to send spoofed emergency alerts that looked like they came from the National Weather Service, but actually originated from our own wedding site. Every guest who downloaded the wedding app to their phone received the fake tornado warnings, because the app had permission to send push notifications. Ruben spent the next 2 hours helping me contact every guest with instructions to delete the compromised app and reset their phone security settings. Some guests were angry about the privacy breach, but most were just relieved to understand what happened, and grateful we were helping them fix it. 2 weeks dragged by while we waited for the courthouse to process our new marriage license application. Jackson and I spent most of that time in therapy sessions working through the boundary issues that let Caitlin get so close to destroying everything. The therapist made Jackson write out every interaction he had with Caitlin after we got engaged, and reading that list made my stomach hurt, but it also helped me understand how he gradually gave her hope without meaning to. We decided on a city hall ceremony with just our parents, siblings, and Miguel, who agreed to officiate again. The idea of something small and private felt safer than trying to recreate the big wedding that had turned into such a nightmare. Paula helped us cancel all the original vendor contracts and file insurance claims for the financial losses. The restraining order against Caitlin came through, and the detective confirmed she was going to trial on multiple felony charges. Knowing she couldn't legally come near us helped me sleep better at night. The City Hall ceremony happened on a Thursday morning with just 12 people present in a small room with fluorescent lights and boring beige walls. Jackson wore a simple suit, and I wore a blue dress I bought off the rack the day before. Miguel kept the ceremony short and meaningful, focusing on honesty and commitment instead of flowery language about destiny. When Jackson said his vows, he promised complete honesty about his feelings and strong boundaries with anyone who threatened our relationship, and his voice cracked when he talked about earning back my trust. I promised to communicate my fears instead of bottling them up and to give him the chance to prove he could change. We signed the actual legal paperwork right there with a court clerk as our witness. Afterward, we went to a nice Italian restaurant where both families had lunch together and toasted our marriage with wine. Jackson's mother hugged me for a long time and whispered that she was proud of both of us for facing everything head-on instead of running away. My dad shook Jackson's hand and told him he better keep those promises. The whole thing felt real in a way the original wedding never did, because we weren't performing for hundreds of guests or trying to create some perfect fairy tale moment. 3 months later, we hosted a backyard party at my parents' house with about 40 close friends and family members. We set up picnic tables and string lights and ordered barbecue from a local place instead of trying to do anything fancy. Sophia made a simple cake that actually tasted good and didn't collapse. Ruben brought his girlfriend and spent the whole time telling everyone how he solved the mystery of the spoofed emails like he was some kind of detective. Miguel brought his guitar and played music while people ate and talked. Jackson and I didn't do formal vows or speeches. We just walked around thanking people for supporting us through everything. My grandmother pulled me aside and said she was glad we chose happiness over spectacle. Jackson's father cornered him near the grill, and I saw them having what looked like a serious conversation that ended with a hug. I still get anxious sometimes when things go wrong or when Jackson's phone buzzes with a message from someone I don't know. But he shows me his messages now without me having to ask, and he tells me immediately if anyone from his past tries to contact him. We're not perfect, and we still argue about stupid things like whose turn it is to do dishes. But we're honest with each other in a way we weren't before, and we're surrounded by people who actually want us to succeed instead of people who showed up for free food and an open bar. That feels like the real victory. That's my side of it. But what about you? I'd love to hear how you would have handled it, so drop a comment and let's compare.